So, Suli, thank you very much for accepting the invite.
I'm humbled, man. Thank you for having me.
Love that you accepted. Thank you so much, and very grateful. So let's start.
Let's do
just
this.
for the beginning, please introduce yourself to the audience. Who is Suli, and what's your background?
Okay. أنا محمد سليمان. I am 32. I'm a medical doctor. I'm currently practicing medicine for Australian University Hospital for Moscow. That's essentially it. There's not much else to it.
Medical field. Why did you choose that?
Why did I choose medicine?
Yes.
Okay. So I think like when I was a kid, as stereotypical as this sounds, a lot of people like go around like your relatives or people that you know, they ask a stereotypical question to a kid like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And when I was a kid, I always was just very inquisitive and curious about things. I'd like to know how things work. I'd like to know how things operate, what the mechanism is behind certain things, no matter what it is. Why is the sky blue? Things like this. Plus, every time when I was a kid, I was like around 4 or 5, whenever I'd get asked that question, I would say, I just want to be a scientist. I just want to know things, right? And then that kind of stayed with me for a few years until you kind of get into school, you get into high school, and you need to start making like pretty serious life-changing decisions around that time. And that was around the time that I kind of needed to streamline certain things. And yes, I'm interested in, let's say, economics and business and whatever, but at the same time, I also want to do the thing that would make me feel like what I do matters to me, at least. So the thing that I chose was I wanted to be in a field where I can satisfy my inquisitive nature and at the same time do the thing that I care a lot about, which is help people, as basic as that sounds. But that was it for me. So I thought the thing that would marry those two like instincts بالنسبة لي was just straight up just going to medicine.
Does it make you fulfilled?
100%. Yeah.
Why?
Because
on a personal level, like why does it make you feel fulfilled? Why it?
It really, I feel like there's in order for you to occupy the space that you occupy on Earth, you need to, there's rent that you need to pay. And I think the most fulfilling way to pay that rent is what I do. In the sense of you alleviate pain, you listen to people, you help make them feel better organically, physiologically, or even emotionally after you see them. The fact that you're able to do that in a quick interaction with people, whether it's 10 to 20 minutes or even less, it just means the world to me.
Yeah, I see. So like making a change in the world in a sense where alleviates pain. So in a sense, it means that a lot of people need like guidance and just to know where to go or where to start in a sense. And I think us as individuals, our role on earth is to help others navigate the way and guide them in a sense. What do you think?
I completely agree. And it doesn't have to be something like grand and very elaborate and whatever. If you remember how you and I met at, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning one of these days during the middle of a work week.
Yeah.
And I just came up to you and I'm like, I feel like you look like you're one of the very few people that I know at the gym who looks like they know what they're doing. If I wanted to get your opinion and pick your brain about A, B, and C, is my front rack position okay for my front squat? Something stupid and silly and inconsequential as that. And you walked me through it and we just got together that way. Like we clicked this way because of a very tiny tweak that you gave me.
Yeah.
That might mean nothing to you, but was consequential to me.
Yeah.
And it matters. These things are not light. They're not silly. They're not fleeting.
Back then, you told me that you're someone who is interested in the carnivore diet.
Hell yeah.
Yes. For those who don't know about it, let's just start with an introduction about it. What is the carnivore diet?
So, essentially, the carnivore diet is a subset of the ketogenic diet. It's a different approach to your nutrition, where there's a lot of different approaches out there in the world in terms of like how to eat well to stay physiologically optimal. And I read up on a lot of these like principles, and the one that seemed to make the most intuitive sense and physiological sense to me was the carnivore diet, because it's a subset of keto. Keto has been proven through like time and time again that it is very helpful to the average person for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
And this, if you apply the basic principles of like carnivore
Mhm.
as a dietary approach, you're going to see it makes a lot of intuitive sense.
Mm.
I looked it up, read up on it extensively, and I loved it. It makes a lot of sense.
Let's discuss the physiologically optimal. What is physiologically optimal? Like, how can we define it? Like, how shall I know that I am currently optimal or not from a medical point of view?
Mhm.
What is physiologically optimal?
Physiologically optimal is you eat and you feel like what you eat helps you accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, and not put a band-aid over a gunshot wound.
Mhm.
Right? So, for example, what are your goals personally when you eat? Some people eat for stimulus, some people eat for
Sure.
nutrition, some people eat just to quiet the rumbling in their stomach,
Yes.
things like that. But on an average day or an average person, I'm sure we can all agree that you eat to function best.
Mhm.
So, for example, what are your goals when you eat?
For me to make sure that I nutritionally fulfill my body in terms of nutrients.
Mhm.
So that I want to make sure that my body is getting sufficient nutrient
Mhm.
of what they need. I'm not the person who usually thinks about, let's say, the flavor or how tasty or not. I just think about the macro and micronutrients when I eat.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think like it's really important that when you eat, you feel better on the other side of the meal than you did before. In terms of, if you eat the right thing, you're going to feel like you're not too full,
Mhm.
you're not too slow, you're not groggy, there's no brain fog, and what you ate is going to help provide the building blocks for you to go about your activities of daily living in the most I wouldn't say, like optimal sense.
Mhm.
Like, let's say if you eat, I'll give you a very simple example. If you go in and you sit down and you have a steak
Mhm.
and butter, for example,
Mhm.
you're gonna eat, you're gonna feel full, you're
Mhm.
gonna feel sufficiently like nourished.
Mhm.
And if I ask you to go for a run in an hour, hour and a half, you're gonna be completely fine to do it.
Mhm.
But if you eat a whole pizza,
Mhm.
right, which might have the same, if not more, of a caloric content than a steak, you're going to feel slow, you're going to feel groggy, you're going to feel like pissy,
Mhm.
you're going to feel heavy, you're going to feel bloated. And if I ask you to go and not even go for a run, just go out to a coffee shop and do some reading,
Mhm.
you're going to be falling asleep half the time.
But let's talk about that. Like, why, let's say, when we eat a pizza, like in terms of calories, it has more calories.
Correct.
And when we eat a steak, though, we feel more, let's say, clear and ready to go. And we feel lighter in a sense.
Yeah.
Why is that? Like, is it in terms of calories? Are we talking that we feel, let's say, the bloating? Or is it in terms of what we eat? Like, why the pizza is worse than the steak in a sense? Let's say on terms of, though the pizza has more calories, so why doesn't it give us like sufficient energy in a sense?
Why doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think we get lost a lot in some of the very big overarching principles that dominate like the nutrition space. For example, the most common thing that you hear about, let's say if you do a random Google search about nutrition and you want to eat quote unquote healthy, is the best dietary approach to go about things is to eat a balanced diet and to apply the food pyramid and to make sure that if you want to lose weight or whatever, you have to be in a caloric deficit, because calories in and calories out is king. And I think that's just way too simplistic and just a myopic way at looking at things, because what we eat is not only how many grams of protein, carbs, and fat are there. A lot of the things that we extract in order to function best comes down to vitamins, your minerals like selenium, your magnesium, your zinc. All these things are micronutrients that do matter a lot. And if you have a deficit in any of them, you're going to suffer. And that's exactly why, like, when you eat like a steak, like an animal-based protein, it's a lot more nutritionally well-rounded and it satisfies a lot of the things that your body requires, as opposed to a grain that we just remixed, right? Because at the end of the day, if you boil it down, what's a pizza? It's a little bit of dairy.
True.
It's a lot of grain. We've messed around with it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be ideal if it's sourdough, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the time it's not. It's going to be immunogenic.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to mess with your gut, your flora. It's a gigantic carbohydrate load,
Mm-hmm.
which with the ensuing like insulin spike, you feel groggy after
Mm-hmm.
the fact, and not much else you extract from it.
You mentioned that it spikes the insulin because of the carbs. So does that mean that carbs don't have a place in the diet in a sense, or do we need to control, or what's your idea about carbs in the diet? Where does it fit?
I think it depends on the type and the quality of the carbs.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we can say that processed sugar and grains and all that, it still is a carbohydrate, but it's a simple carb,
Mm-hmm.
right? The more complex or the more, I don't know how to say this, natural your source of carbs,
Okay.
the more likely that it is going to help you. So, for example, if you source your carbs from fruit, for
Mm-hmm.
example, it's a much better way at consuming your carbohydrates as opposed to having like a gigantic bowl of rice, right? If you have your source of carbs from dates, from honey,
Mm-hmm.
you're much more likely to extract a lot, nutritionally speaking, from those sources
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to having some crackers,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's something like they're not two things that are the same. We cannot
Okay.
equate them. Is there a place for them in the diet? Of course.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to say that there's like an easy like rule of thumb to apply when it comes to carbohydrates, if you want to function optimally,
Mm-hmm.
I think that if we all look at carbohydrates as like a celebratory
Mm-hmm.
food, I think we'd be a lot better off than we are as a people in terms of your nutrition. Like, for example, if it's your birthday, yeah, have at it, have
Yeah.
pizza, right? But if every weekend comes by or I go to work and I have like a bad day at work and I come back and I have carbs and
Yeah.
I'm hungry and I have carbs, or I'm bored and I'm on the road and I go in and I have like a gigantic bag of chips or whatever, I don't think it does anybody well. And that's exactly what we're seeing apply worldwide, not just in North America or Europe or whatever.
What we're discussing here comes like against the flow of what we usually hear about meat and animal-based protein.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the majority of the norm in the media and such, they always talk about how meat is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think they say that meat is bad? And what's your idea about meat? Like, why the controversy in a sense? Is it good? Is it bad? Where does it fit?
Okay. Are we going to go down the rabbit hole? Like conspiracy theory?
Let's start slowly, yeah.
Conspiratorial? Let's go. Okay. So, I don't know where to start with this, but let me think. A long time ago, as people, if you were to boil us down to like a line that describes humans,
Mm-hmm.
you would say we can all agree that we're all hunters and gatherers,
True.
right? But we're hunters first.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we're hunters is because the most coveted source of nutrition for us back in the day, even more so now,
Mm-hmm.
is animal-based protein.
Mm-hmm.
Because our programming and our processing of our digestive tract and our physiology is more consistent and much more able to process and digest that as opposed to things that your body does not recognize. A simple example I can give you with that is the reason that trans fats are bad for us
Mm-hmm.
is because it's formulated and that particular fat is articulated in a way that our body does not know what to do with it. And it really struggles. Our liver struggles with how to deal with it because it's made up and built in a way that is evolutionarily inconsistent,
Mm-hmm.
or we just don't have the programming for
We
it.
don't have the tools to digest it in a sense.
Or deal with it. Our
Yes.
body just doesn't know what to do with it. Because let's say you have an iPhone and I had a BlackBerry back in the day. I'm unable to use or function with like BBM because my iPhone doesn't have the basic
operating
programming
system for it.
Exactly. And that's essentially it, right? So the more we eat things that are like our operating system operates with optimally, the easier and more downstream the process is going to be. The more we eat things that are messed with and are much newer and our body has not had the time to acclimate to it through years and years of nutrition, of evolution, I apologize, the more difficult it's going to be to deal with and the less of a good time your body's going to have with it, right? The reason So for the longest time, we operated as hunters and gatherers. Men would go out, they would hunt an animal, they'd keep eating at this animal for the next, let's say, month until the next hunt,
Sure.
right? And in the meantime, women would be caretakers for the little kids that we'd have, and they would forage in the forest for like berries or some roots or some tiny fruit that we can eat to keep us calorically like nourished until the next big hunt, right? Eventually, this process got a little bit too taxing for some people, and they wanted a little bit more predictability and to stop being nomads and plant in a place. And with that came the advent of farming. Farming guarantees a crop for you a certain amount. If you make an investment now, 2, 3, 4 down, like months down the line, you're going to get a certain amount of food that can stand to nourish you, and you can make a business out of it and accumulate wealth through it. So the advent of farming is pretty recent. Like
it guarantees you consistency of nutrients,
predictability. Instead of running around after that thing and like, oh, what if these animals migrate during the winter and blah, blah, blah. If you plant in a place, you have a little bit more stability. You can form a community. You can watch your kids grow instead of having to move every like 3-4 months. And with that, if I plant and I'm going to harvest some crop, I can guarantee to feed my family and my community, right? Which is not as easy or consistent when it came to hunting, right? Because of migratory patterns and everything. I feel like I kind of like drifted off of what we were trying to say.
No, you're doing on the right track, like because we were discussing about like why meat is
demonized
in a sense.
Yeah.
So we started off by like we are the hunter gatherers, and then now we reached a point where we are more of an agricultural society.
Yes.
Let's say we start with the agricultural society.
Correct.
Yeah.
And as time went on until like the early 20th century, we've been living in industrialized nations, and with that comes the advent of like bigger, faster, stronger, more efficient, as opposed to relying on manpower, essentially. So with that came the advent of like factory farming and blah, blah, blah. Of course, we can all agree that that's not the optimal way to do things. It's evil. It's harmful for the environment and. But with that came the desire for ease. And with ease, like we'd rather do the thing that we can turn over more consistently, more reliably, and genetically cross certain things in terms of crop, as opposed to like waiting for an animal. So what you plant in terms of crops, you can yield within a year on average. In terms of animals, it's not as easy to do that. These animals get sick. They take a lot of time to be in gestation, be born, to be able to yield, like, let's say dairy from them, to be able to, like, they've lived their like lifeline or lifetime long enough for you to be able to guarantee their health, so you can like slaughter them and then use them for nutrition. It's just a matter of ease.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who are of wealth that were interested in getting into the thing that would generate most income, more consistent, more reliable income.
Yes.
So the way they got into that is by going all in and putting all their chips into farming, right? When there's big players and big hitters in a certain industry, they have a lot more yield. And with the yield, they can go in and like bribe certain labs, certain scientists, certain healthcare systems to skew the narrative in the thing that would guarantee them much more income, as opposed to skewing it in terms of like the pursuit of actual
health,
observable truth.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's essentially what ended up happening in the latter part of the 20th century. A lot of big players got into the farming industry. They went in and started bribing like certain scientists to skew certain models to, or like certain studies to come out with results that basically guarantee them much more income. And that's where the whole narrative of saturated fats are bad for you, they're going to cause heart attacks and strokes and all that came from. And not from, oh, we did an experiment, it's a randomized control trial, this arm and that arm, and there's the control, this is the intervention that we're looking at, and we want to see like objective truth. That's very rare. Unfortunately, that's been toyed with, like the empirical science has been toyed with in the past few years, but we are where we are.
So in a sense, we have been driven, or like, I'm not going to say lied to, because like lied to is like a heavy word, but programmed in a sense, to follow a certain narrative, which is like, let's say, away from the true reality, to serve a purpose of increasing the margin yields of profit for certain companies. And because actually the other day I was doing a research and I found out that in 1969 there's a sugar foundation back then.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they have paid 3 Harvard scientists the equivalent of $50,000 today.
Exactly.
To just go out and say that, hey, fats and saturated fats are bad for your health, and sugar and carbs are better for your cardiovascular and heart problems.
Yeah.
So ever since, and people have been thinking about that, like, and I think this is like where one of the shifts have started happening.
100%.
Because like nowadays, like when I think about it, like what's, let's say, the most optimal diet? In my mind, an optimal diet is a diet where you don't need as much supplementation, in a sense.
Exactly.
Where you just eat natural food. And when I look at vegans and vegetarians, and I don't have anything against them because I myself have tried being vegan for a while.
You're better than I am.
Yeah. And they supplement, and I used to supplement with a lot of things to fill the gaps which I used to have.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk, let's say, to some vegans or vegetarians, they tell me about how good they feel at the beginning. Why do you think they feel good? Like, does it work for some and does it not work for some? Like, why some people, when they start on a vegan or vegetarian diet, they start feeling better, in a sense?
I think it's very easy because they're going through what a lot of people call the vegan honeymoon, which is essentially, if most of your nutrition, traditionally speaking, before you make that dietary change, is the standard American diet of fast food, processed sugars, additives, preservatives, for most of your life, and then all of a sudden you start incorporating whole foods, raw, not so heavily processed and messed with, you're gonna feel good. But with that comes the territory of going way too hard in a certain direction and not addressing some of the things that your body is designed to demand of your nutrition in order to keep biological functions at least at maintenance. I'm not even telling you to operate optimally even. For example, if we, let's say I decide to be a raw food vegan, right? I'm going to gain a lot of yield from certain things, but in the end of the day, I cannot nourish myself in terms of iron, selenium, zinc, in terms of B12, all your other B vitamins, your K2, all that, your vitamin D, off of the back of spinach and kale. Yeah. And a very simple process that we can think about is, again, the operating system that we spoke about. Your body is designed to extract certain things and pull them out of your gut much more efficiently from one source as opposed to the other. Okay. Right? So that's the whole principle of bioavailability. Yes, if we take 100 grams of kale or spinach, let's say, and compare it to 20 ounces of, jerky, yeah, of course, you're going to see there might be differences in terms of the percentage of iron that's inside spinach, for example. But at the same time, if you compare that to a tiny amount of ground meat, and you see how much your body can stand to absorb from either, it's not going to be the same. Yeah. It's, again, the principle of the operating system. It doesn't really change much. And that's it. Thinking that you can equate this to that is very myopic.
Also, speaking of bioavailability, sorry. The other day I was reading, for example, if you need to take a certain amount of protein from an animal-based food, you would need much more quantity to be equivalent, let's say, to a tinier amount when it comes to an animal-based protein. Yeah. I think this is where the bioavailability comes because, for example, 100 grams of beef is equivalent to around, let's say, 20 grams of protein, which your body is gonna, let's say, absorb 16 grams out of after the burn effect and your microbiota and such, because you don't absorb the whole amount of protein. Yeah. And compared to, let's say, if you want to take 100 grams of, let's say, peas or chickpeas, they're not going to get the equivalent of the amount of protein which is available also in that. Speaking of which, for example, when you go to the supermarket and you see on the label of oats that per 100 grams, for example, it has, let's say, for the sake of conversation, 10 grams of protein. Your body is not going to absorb 100% out of this 10 gram. Usually they absorb only 30% from the animal from the plant-based source,
Yes.
which is equivalent to 3 grams of protein, which is way less than what we would absorb from the animal-based protein.
And at the same time, if you want to sustain your entire nutrition off of like the back of like plant and vegetarian type foods, you're gonna have to be eating all day. Nobody has time for that, especially like the pace of life that we currently live in, especially if you're living in a metropolitan setting, especially if you're a person who has like dreams, goals, and ambitions.
Yeah.
Who's gonna be eating all day? Nobody has time for that, or even
Yeah.
the energy. I don't want to chew all day.
Yeah. Speaking of which, speaking of the operating systems, cows.
Yeah.
I was watching the other day, how they have two stomachs, and
yeah, the ruminant animals.
yes, they keep chewing all day. Like for example, after they eat a plant,
Yeah.
it goes back to their digestive system, and after that, in a while, it goes back to their mouth, and they keep on chewing.
Yeah.
That's why you always see them chewing all day long, because they still haven't absorbed all the nutrients. And even the animals which they eat plants, they have a different operating system, let's say, different digestive system, which helps them to absorb, let's say, the protein out of the plants, in a sense.
That's why they call them ruminant animals, by the way. There's a subset of mammals that eat and process their food in that way. So essentially what they do is that they have multiple stomachs, and let's say they have a big serving of, let's say, grass, right? Or hay, and they eat it. And then they digest it. One digestion goes to the first stomach, and then to the second, and then they regurgitate it, and they keep chewing it again, because it gives them multiple opportunities to break down the cellulose in terms of the cell wall of the plant that they just ate, or the grass, or whatever. And that's why they say to ruminate, to redo it again. That's where it comes from. That's why they're called ruminant animals. And when someone, for example, let's say someone who has clinical depression, they say one of the things that they do is they ruminate. They keep replaying things into their head multiple times in order for them they keep getting flashbacks of it, to process it, keeps hurting them time and time again. And that's what they call ruminating.
I see. Yeah, very true. Where do you think that the carnivore diet fits in terms of overall health? In a sense, let's, for example, take coronary heart disease, let's say, or vasoconstrictions and such. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it support? Does it not support?
What's good or bad? The diet, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's high in fats, high in meat, high in, I'm assuming, sodium as well and such. So, because all these, as we mentioned, are demonized. So do we have, for example, if I need to advise someone, hey, start with eating meat, butter, and such. How can I advise them that, hey, this is a good thing? Start with it. Do we have any evidence to support my claims?
There's a lot of studies that do, some of the reason that some studies have demonized red meat, and they say that it causes colon cancer, it increases your chances of developing a heart attack or a stroke or whatever, is because the meat that they had as part of the nutrition in that randomized control trial was part of a burger, right? And eating foods that are highly processed, highly messed with, and it's not an accurate representation of what characterizes a carnivorous diet, right? So when I have a burger and fries and a milkshake and all that good stuff from a regular fast food chain, it's not going to have the exact nutritional yield as a piece of meat that you put salt and pepper onto, right? So that's one thing that we need to identify and put a line in the sand in order to explain certain phenomena. So the more clean that our inquisitive eye can be, the more we can yield realistic results that tell the actual truth. In recent years, a lot of voices have come out to dispel some of those older studies, and they've tried, and they've actually successfully executed studies that are randomized control trials, interventional trials, that actually take a lot of those variables out of the equation. They go you're in group 1, you're in group 2, you're in the experimental arm, you're in the control arm. Here's what you guys are going to have, let's say, one time a week for dinner. You guys do whatever you want. And with that, it's a lot more of a controlled experiment, and you're much more likely to yield accurate results that at least approach the truth much more than the other ones, right? The reason that, so from a scientific perspective, it has been proven in recent years. And that's why, for example, it took a really long time, but the American Heart Association came out with an official statement about this about a year and a half ago, I think a year, where they were talking about how for the last almost 60, 70 years, saturated fats have been demonized, and they they said that there's some sort of correlation between the amount and density of saturated fats in your diet with the incidence of coronary artery disease and all that. That's been dispelled because it's not true, because it's not based on fact, right? So even from a scientific perspective, the narrative is very slowly changing, right? Why would you advise someone to eat in that way? Because it's very evolutionarily consistent. Some people might freak out because like, oh, there's a lot of like triglycerides in it. There's a lot of saturated fats in it. There's a lot of like, it's going to raise my cholesterol. Oh, I have family history of blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. I guarantee you, no one in the past has eaten their way into an early grave by eating the things that are consistent with your operating system. It doesn't work that way, right? The more you incorporate things that are outside of that operating system or mess with it or are not, or are against the grain of that operating system, the more likely you are to harm yourself, right? So like I said, and we spoke about earlier, we've always traditionally been hunters and gatherers.
Yes.
What does a hunter do? They hunt a big animal and they keep eating from it. What does the animal yield for them? A lot of fat, a lot of protein, right? I'm pretty sure you haven't heard of any incidences of cancers, like heart attacks, heart disease, strokes, MIs.
Man, have you seen the health of the indigenous people? Like the other day, I was like taking a look at the documentary. They were talking. They don't even have like gum diseases, no dental problems, and
their bone structure in their face is a lot more aligned, better than most of us, because a lot of the things that they do when they eat, they spend a lot more time chewing. And with that, your bone structure and your facial structure improves. A lot of the things that we get by eating a modernized metropolitan diet, it entails a lot less chewing, so your facial bone structure does not change. It collapses. It's a lot more easily atrophic, and with that comes a lot of problems that have to even do with your breathing, which has nothing to do with your cardiovascular system, or not much actually. You're much more likely to get sinusitis. You're much more likely to be asthmatic, to get like a very vulnerable type respiratory system or chest, and all because you're much more likely to get sleep apnea and snore because you're not doing enough chewing. When you chew, some of the stem cells in the bones of your face are activated, and they accommodate the mechanical stress that you keep applying on them. And with it, it opens up and it just hypertrophies. And it makes space for that. When you don't do enough of that and you don't do enough chewing, these stem cells are not activated. So they're less likely to hypertrophy. They're less likely to develop. And with that, you see like the very common facial and bone structure that you see when you walk through the mall. You're going to see some people who don't have like that prominent of a chin, cheekbones, nasal bridge. You're going to hear them breathe in very erratic fashions. And I'm sure that translates into a lot of their activities of daily living, or even in their sleep. And that's why you see like some of the Maasai that didn't really, let's say the indigenous populations, whether it's in Australia, in Kenya, the Amazon, a lot of these people didn't really have much contact with the modern world or some of the things that come with the modern world. And yet their skulls, when we dig them up, are much better looking than ours in terms of like alignment of the jaw, underbite, overbite, all that good stuff. Their nasal passages are different. Their nasopharynxes are completely different.
They didn't even find like signs of arthritis. They didn't find
cavities, any of these things.
Wonderful, man. Like it's so weird. Like
autoimmune illnesses, cancers, melanomas,
signs
even though they try
inflammation and nothing.
They try really hard to demonize the sun for the longest time. And if we needed to apply sunblock traditionally and regularly, like since we've been humans for the past, let's say 70,000 years, you and I would not last long enough to be having this conversation. Demonizing the sun is insane to me.
What's that? Like, because I hear that from most of the doctors, actually. Like, I've had a couple of talks with ophthalmologists, dermatologists, and they always tell me how important it is for us to protect ourselves from the sun. So what's the idea?
Same thing. The pharmaceutical industry, again, conspiratorial as hell, but there's a lot of influence, money, and power in the pharmaceutical industry. When the big players get into that, because they can guarantee profit off the backs of people being sick, which we can guarantee much more now than we did, let's say, 100 years ago, these big players are going to find a way to skew certain studies to sell the product or sell us the cure or sell us the solution of the problem that they seem to think that we or that they're trying to convince us that we have. A lot of the people that we knew that live in a way that's consistent to how we've always been as humans live long enough. For example, you're much more likely to hear of people that come from our parents or our grandparents' generation to have lived to 90 plus as opposed to now. That's an example. True. And these people, I guarantee, did not have access to sunblock, deodorants, any of these any of these preservatives, any of these additives, the food coloring, none of these things. What do these people do? They want to work. They eat certain things that are pretty evolutionarily consistent in terms of like animal protein or dairy, butter, whatever. They go out in the sun because if you stay indoors, it doesn't really serve you well, or nobody likes sitting indoors unnecessarily. And they function pretty well.
Man, like speaking of which, like I can tell about my grandfather.
Yeah.
He used to be a farmer, and he's still alive until now. I think he's like maybe 88 or 89 years old. Man, like, and he went to the hospital a couple of times, and every time he goes, they always tell him, stop eating a high-fat diet, stop eating butter, stop eating ghee and such, and stop eating tahini, which is the high-fat and such. Like, they always try to relate everything that he had for the high-fat diet. And he just didn't. And he's still alive until now, despite like all what the doctors are saying. Which, let's say, speaks about how their life back then, him being exposed to the sun, nature, natural food, how is it so orthodox to what the modern medicine is saying and advising the community on what we should do. So I don't know, like I don't know if he's like, let's say, the black swan, let's say, but I've seen that not only in him, I've seen that like in many people who used to, let's say, be farmers and live out of nature and eat what they harvest and such, and they have pretty good health comparably to us who are living in the modern societies in a sense.
It's crazy, man, because a lot of the times when you go look at a person like your grandpa, this guy spent most of his life in the sun. Does he have any issues with like any skin disease, any like crazy, unbelievable wrinkles, any like lesions? Nothing.
No.
Spent most of his day in the sun, whether he was a kid or an adult. And God bless him. Look how well he did for himself. Because what he probably does is spend most of his day in the sun. He exposes his eyes and his skin to the sun. His body reacts in a positive way that it's programmed to react to the sun with. And it's all downhill from there. It's very simple.
Let's talk about cholesterol. Why does everybody feel this fear when they hear the word cholesterol? Is it bad for us? Is it good? What's the role of it?
There's a few studies that, again, are very...
First of all, what is cholesterol?
Okay. Cholesterol is basically a significant building block that you extract from your nutrition, and it's a form of fat, right? The reason cholesterol is important is because every single cell of our body, as part of the cell wall of that particular cell, no matter what it is, if it's a skin cell, a hair cell, a muscle cell, a bone cell, whatever, each and every single one of them has a bilayer called the plasma membrane. That's like the components and the building blocks of that plasma membrane are fats, right? These fats, most of the time, if not all the time, are extracted from your nutrition. And it comes in the form of varying forms of the building blocks and different types of fat, but the most basic and common one of them would be cholesterol, right? Cholesterol in excess would need to be processed differently with your body, with your liver. It distributes it in a way. So essentially, let's say, just for argument's sake and to pose an example, in order for you to function best, your body and your liver needs to deal with 10 units of cholesterol a day. If you eat 12 or 15, it keeps circulating it into your body, and it might increase the chance of it overflowing, the excess, into your arteries, right? So the mainstream theory and the mainstream hypothesis before was, the more I eat cholesterol that's in excess of what my body needs, it's going to dump it in the arteries. And if I have like high blood pressure or I smoke consistently, in a setting of excess cholesterol deposition in the arteries, it's more likely to develop ischemic attacks, like when it comes to your heart, when it comes to your brain, any of those things, right? That's the reason it's demonized.
Yes.
But again, we need to put things into into context.
Mhm.
A lot of people, for example, fear LDL, which
Yes.
they call like the bad cholesterol,
Yes.
right? LDL has been found to help you when you have like a grave injury. Let's say, God forbid, you get into like a car accident, right? And you have like a big gaping wound. LDL goes through the roof in order to help you in the healing process of that. You have a bad flu, LDL rises, right? LDL rising is not necessarily like a bad thing if we read things and evaluate them within context. LDL is there as part of the acute response to an injury in your body, an injurious like event, right? Excess LDL in the background of background inflammation can be harmful, yes. But having like elevated levels of LDL does not necessarily sign your death certificate for you. And I think there's like a very important distinction that we do not talk about often enough, and a lot of like studies have ignored, and context is everything in these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like the same thing applies actually to creatinine. The other day I was reading, like the minute that doctors see that creatinine levels are high, they always blame it on creatine.
Yeah.
And I've also spoke to a couple of physicians and so on, and they told me that not necessarily, because creatinine can be elevated for a couple more reasons. Maybe if
you had a hard workout, your creatinine is going to be through the roof.
Exactly. One of the things, like had a bad workout, sick.
You didn't drink enough during your workout, your electrolytes are deficient.
On a medication or so. So the context, again, also plays a big role in these things. Let's talk about salt and hypertension. What's the relation, and should we fear salt in a sense?
Okay. I'm going to tell you the mainstream narrative, and then I'm going to tell you, again, when we put things into context, it's much more easy to see the truth. Right? So the mainstream narrative is one of the underlying factors as to why some people have really elevated blood pressure readings and can stand to put you in the danger zone in terms of developing ischemic attacks, whether it's heart attacks or brain attacks or whatever, is because the higher the amount of salt that you consume, the more likely that salt is going to draw water, the more likely that your blood volume is going to expand, the more likely that the circulating blood volume is going to have an effect on your arteries, and it's not easy to accommodate the increased blood volume consistently like that, and it puts you in danger for ischemic attacks. Therefore, avoid salt. That's the mainstream basic way of going about things, right? But again, when you put things in context, things are completely different, right? Someone, let's say you're a very like young and active person. If you have a lot of salt, your kidneys are going to do their job. They're going to keep what it needs and discard of what it needs. And if it's an elevated salt load than you're used to, as long as it's like a clean source of salt, it's not like basic like table salt. Your kidneys are going to do what it needs. It's going to keep the water or the salt or discard it, depending on your needs and your circulating blood volume and your pH and all these things, right? But if you were a person who's metabolically unhealthy, let's say you're a person who's a standard Joe who has metabolic syndrome, you have a background of inflammation as is because of your metabolic status, and you live in a chronically hyperinsulinemic state. And with that, when you have a lot of carbohydrates, your body releases a lot of insulin, and that insulinemic response and that spike has an effect on your kidneys as well, in terms of what it discards and in terms of like it comes in and it tells the kidney to do things that might not be as consistent with what the kidney's objectives might be, right? Because it's dealing with a physiological stress of a high like glucose load with that meal that you just had. So the insulin comes in, tells the kidney to do things that it might not want to do, right? And it draws a lot more salt and fluid within your system, and it increases your chances of having the ischemic attacks happen, right? If a person is biologically healthy and you compare that person to, and their like downstream like kidney effects to a high salt load, and a metabolically unhealthy person with metabolic syndrome and chronically high insulin states, this is going to definitely be important for context and how your body responds and how it distributes your blood volume and what it keeps and what it doesn't, as opposed to this person, as opposed to that person. Again, context is very important here. If we look at them as if they're one and the same, we're just not telling the truth. We're just being intellectually lazy and untruthful. That's it.
So like looking at the big picture goes back, like it's not always like a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of scenario. We have to look at the whole context, like the underlying conditions, everything, take everything into consideration, and then maybe decide, well, okay, let's relate this to that now, in a sense. And it's weird, like, because when you look on the internet nowadays, like, you have all this information. Somehow they have demonized everything.
Yeah.
Like, wherever I look, you find people who demonize meat. You find people who demonize plant food. You find people who demonize salt. You find people who don't demonize salt. Like, for a normal person, I honestly don't know how can they filter the correct information. Like, what should they do? Like, who should they listen to? Sometimes I honestly feel that withdrawing, like taking a step back, and for you just to try what better suits your body. Because speaking of which, for some people, purely carnivore diet works. For some others, it doesn't work. So sometimes they have to do a tweak that suits their body, in a sense. So I don't think that people have to follow a certain extreme. Like mediocrity, in a sense of choosing what works best for you, is also a key narrative that people have to talk to, because now the media always try to push one thing. Doctors are trying to push another. Influencers are pushing something, a product or whatever. And the normal person, the average person who has no background, who has no idea, is just stuck in the middle.
They don't know what to do.
Everyone is just pulling them from one side to the other. It's so weird.
But I think in order to be honest, I think there is a simple way to kind of like navigate through the noise, right? It's an exhausting way, but the reward on the other side of learning how to do this is very important, whether it has to do with nutrition or just your basic pursuit of truth, which is just to find a way to invest in learning how to be empirically coherent, in the sense that if you're able to be a person who knows how to evaluate a good quality study from a bad quality study, to know the difference between like correlational studies and interventional type trials, and know which one ranks higher on the hierarchy of scientific studies and which one ranks less, you're going to be able to kind of like, a lot of these like news outlets or social media personalities or whatever, like you said, they advertise a lot of things with headings and titles and articles and whatever. But if you were to run after the source and go and read, like, what kind of study was this? Who did this? What's the number? What's the context? Is this a randomized control trial? Is this a systematic review? Is this a meta-analysis? Is this a correlational study? Is this an observational study? If you know how to navigate these terms and you know which one matters more, which study and the yield of that study matters less, you're going to be able to pursue the truth and decide for yourself. You're going to be literate, scientifically literate. And especially in the day and age that we live in the information highway that we've been on for a while, especially after Y2K till now, things are changing. Like every now and then you hear like about a study that has to do with coffee. Coffee is bad for you. Coffee is going to cause a heart attack. Coffee is amazing for your brain health. Coffee is neuroprotective against Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. 20 different things. 20 different sources. You know how to navigate and cut the knife through that, like a lot of the bullshit that you hear. You just go straight up. You do your homework. You go on to certain sources. You know how to, if you've been scientifically literate and you've invested in that, you're going to be able to kind of dispel like reality from truth. And the same way, and I don't think what I'm saying is an unreasonable thing, because very commonly you hear within the group of friends that we have, especially when phenomena like this come up, you hear about them like, I'm taking this course so I know how to deal with crypto, and I'm learning how to program so I can know how to do this and that. These things are very common. And I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of these studies out there, or you know someone who's learned enough to be able to go to them and tell them, I want to learn like how to tell like reality from like bullshit and like noise. How do you do that? What do you do? What are your sources? What does it entail? Can you tell me what like an odds ratio means? What's the like a positive likelihood ratio? What does that mean? What's the confidence interval? If you ask these questions, or you go to like some sort of course and you learn how to navigate these things, I think it's a lot easier for you to navigate through life, especially in the age that we live in, because there's there's a gigantic fire hose worth of information coming at us all the time. And if you don't know how to go like, I can listen to this, but this is bullshit, or I read an article off the magazine and I equate that to something that's in a scientific journal that's peer reviewed, you're very likely to suffer and be like to go with the waves.
Yeah, you're gonna be overflown by information, and you're just like, you
just go with the tide.
Yeah, fed up with information in a sense, like overflown with information, like from everyone.
Yeah,
and it's tough actually. It's tough. I don't know, like sometimes social media, when I think about it, like it's like a bat, you know. It's a tool. You either use it to hit someone, or you either use it to play baseball. In a sense. So it has the information, it has the tools and knowledge, but it depends upon the person on how they want to use that tool, in a sense. Whether they want to navigate through it carefully, or they want to follow the tide, and get, let's say, ramped in the sea, in a sense, like get lost in the sea. It's weird. On a personal level, where are you going now? Where are you in life? What are you planning for the future?
So in the past year or so, I decided to kind of like do a little bit of a career shift. So I ended up moving to Cairo to do an intern year there. And it's been quite the experience. Like some of the crazy things that I've seen there come as on the back of like how high flow and how like under-resourced that healthcare system can be. So it's been really interesting seeing like how medicine is practiced over there in terms of like making do with less resources.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. It's really cool actually, and I never thought I'd admire it like that, because there's a lot of things that you see or you hear about even before you get into the system that kind of like are heart-wrenching. But seeing how some of the professionals and the doctors and the specialists over there operate with much less than would be optimal in a healthcare or medical setting, it's been inspiring actually. It's been really, really cool. So I'm just finishing off that intern year. I've applied to my residency like in a bunch of specialties, like in a bunch of places, and I'm waiting to hear back. And then the next step is just to go down the residency hole, and then get out of that.
Good luck, buddy. Good luck. I wish you nothing but happiness. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience before we finish up? Anything on your mind that you want to share from Suli yourself?
I think the main thing that we spoke about today is just being like literate and just looking at things and asking questions. I think that's the most important thing that you can do, especially the time and place that we live in right now, because it's very easy to fall victim to a lot of misinformation. It's very easy to find someone who comes out and tells you A, B, and C that you see at the gym, and they hit you with a lot of bro science and whatever, and like a lot of anecdotes, and present that as ultimate truth. When a lot of the times, like, the person might mean well, but you just need to go and decide for yourself, is this accurate or is this bullshit? And I think like if we look at things with an inquisitive eye like that, I think we can go far. And when you keep calling people out on bullshit and you keep like pointing at that not being truthful and that being truthful, we're much more likely to head down a better route and have higher quality things come out, as opposed to things that are trying to trick or bypass the system. Man, that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much
for
coming in, man. I wish nothing but happiness for you and your family. All the best in the future.
I love what you're doing with this, man. This is really good and it's really important. So good for you, and keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it, man.